Hey guys, Bud Elliott here. Welcome back again to the Cover 3 podcast. This is my summer school series. If you're hearing this one, I'm wearing a blue shirt. You can tell on the day that we did this, I was sick. But luckily, I don't have to do most of the talking in this episode. We're talking Syracuse. I'm going to News Magician. That's Mike Ostrowski. Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on. I love talking to me some Cuse football.
I'll always going to go back to my old haunts of SB Nation, and you guys do a tremendous job over there for sure. Last year, a nice rebound season for Syracuse. Returned to a bowl game, 7-6. New offense looked quite a bit better, than it had looked. Defense was thin and yet stayed fairly healthy at some of the key spots and was able to make large improvements there. What was it like to cover this team last year?
It was a whirlwind of emotions, and I think the best way to put it is if they had won the 7 games in a different order, the reaction would be a lot different. But to start off 6-0, to be ranked, to have much greater aspirations, and to be on the verge of beating Clemson in Death Valley, and then everything just fell apart from there. It really was. It kind of seemed like the whole world was coming down on Syracuse near the end of last season, but it was still a successful season. Going into the year, the goal was to make a bowl game, and they did that. And considering how many injuries they had, especially on the defensive side of the ball, in my eyes, it's still a year that has been one of the best years in recent memory for Syracuse.
Offensively, this team improved quite a bit, all the way to 62nd, at least in Bill Connolly's ratings. I think they were certainly better than that at times during the year. Garrett Schrader got dinged up a little bit, but still had a pretty solid season, 50% success rate, 65% completion, 17-7 ratio. Where have you seen him grow this offseason, or where is he attempting to get better?
Well, in the offseason, he underwent a surgery, so he actually missed spring camp. But prior to that, what he really needs to work on, I should say prior to that, what he was doing well was connecting with Aronde Gatson. What he needs to do moving forward is find himself a number 2 receiver, because if you've only got one receiving option, you're going to be doubled all day long. He is much more of a on-the-run passer than a stand-in-the-pocket passer. That being said, he's improved in that regard. He's been able to read his line better, knows when to run, and isn't instinctively taking off the second he can. He's been much better at going through his progressions. And I think this year it's going to be vital he continues to do that with a suspect O-line, some maybe more variety in the receiving core. We should get to that in a second. But this is his senior year, his last chance to show what he can do in college. And I think coming off a year where he threw for over 2,600 yards, expect that number to go up even higher this year.
Last year, he was able to lean on the run game. Sean Tucker, one of the best backs in the ACC in a while. Between rushes and catches, he had 260 touches on the season for, almost 1,300 yards. So a really nice all-purpose season there. I'm sorry?
No, good. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. A really nice season for Tucker. Not that they can totally replace him, but how are they going to attempt to replace him?
Well, LaQuint Allen will be the new bell cow back. Now, don't expect him to rush for another 1,000 yards right out of the gate. We should see a little more variety in the backfield. There are some other guys on the roster. Ike Davis could make an impact. Joshua Escobar, who played fairly well in New Mexico before he transferred to Syracuse last year. He didn't really see much usage, but he had a lot more reps in spring camp. I do think he'll rotate in a bit as at least a third down, short yardage situation back. But one thing with LaQuint Allen that he does have that Sean Tucker also had is that pass catching ability. I saw in spring camp, I saw a lot of him being used as a receiver inside the red zone, and I expect that to be the case this coming year. He's got great hands for a running back, and expect that to be the norm for the Syracuse offense.
At receiver, Gatson is, I think, one of the more underrated players nationally. You don't hear a lot of national shows talk about him, but I know he did come up recently in our Cover 3 skill position player draft. So and we are trying to give him some love. A guy is kind of like a hybrid receiver, tight end type, but a dude that the body style is increasingly being used across pro sports and is kind of a matchup nightmare. Who do you project being the complement to him? Because obviously he's the dude who can be the two.
Well, according to Dino himself, he said Isaiah Jones, who he was off to an okay start to the year last year before getting knocked out in the Purdue game in week 3. He was out for the rest of the season. At that point, he only had 4 catches, but Dino admitted that the plan going into the season was for Jones to be the number 1 receiver. And everything we saw in spring camp seems that he's pretty darn close to at least getting that number 2 spot locked back up. He's still maybe not, he still needs to work on the consistency a little bit, as do a lot of people in his SU room, but he'd be my pick to emerge as that number 2 threat. You've also got some streaky deep guys, Marcus Adams, Damian Alford. They've had their flashy plays, but again, the consistency, you hear a lot of that where they have their moments, but can they do it on a game to game basis is the big question.
Makes a lot of sense. I remember Isaiah Jones was a pretty good player for Cocoa High School, which is kind of near over here. Definitely a guy that has some real upside. It's got to be 4 or 5 years ago though that he was in school there. Guy that's got some experience on him. Offensive line wise, this is an area I've sort of circled to ask you about, and one that would concern me a little bit because Syracuse loses Matthew Bergeron, who was like a second or third round pick, I think, at tackle.
Second round of the Falcons.
Second rounder. Yeah. And they also lose Dakota Davis, who, like, I'm not going to tell you Dakota Davis was great by the numbers, but he was better than anybody else they had at tackle because he played almost every single one of their snaps on the season. So how is Syracuse attempting to replace both tackles?
Well, so far, not to be frank, it's not going too well. In spring camp, that had to be the most glaring issue of concern. It's mainly guys that have been on the roster. You've got Enrique Cruz, who was a backup over at left tackle, Kalen Ellis, one of the only returning stars from last year at the guard, Josh Iona, most likely going to be the center, Chris Blake at right guard, who has a lot of injury concerns. He was out again in spring camp, so we don't know if he's going to be ready for fall or not. We haven't had a clear answer on that. And then Joe Moore, a JUCO transfer over at the right tackle spot. He was okay. I think he still has a bit of a learning curve to get back to the true Division I level tackle, but the right side is the bigger area of concern. It did not look good at all in spring camp, and that's going against a very young defensive line. Maybe it's a line with a lot of talent, but not proven talent. So if there's one position that I think needs more reinforcements, and to be fair, is getting more reinforcements over the summer with a couple more JUCO prospects, is the O-line. It's not in good shape right now. It's been a reason why Syracuse has struggled for years on end, and I am glad that Dino is addressing it with more guys in the portal.
For sure. I will say this year particularly, the tackle crop has been poor in the portal. And it's almost always barren, but I mean, I know we've had Ohio State on here. We've had a number of programs on here. Oregon celebrating getting a guy from Rhode Island, right? And like Ohio State probably needed 2 and only got 1. So if those level of programs are struggling to get competent tackles, it certainly speaks to just the difficulty of doing so within the portal. Like I know, I mean, you kind of got to get creative at times and get guys who, can, maybe they're more true guards, but they have enough footwork, but it's not the length to play out there and make it work potentially. But we'll certainly monitor who they have coming in from the JUCO ranks this summer and how they look in the fall by following your coverage. In your mind, this offense is not better than last year's offense, right?
No, the offense, okay, I would say, is probably a little worse. So not game-changing worse, but not having Sean Tucker hurts. Not having a great O-line hurts a lot. And it's going to take them a little time. Now, they have the same situation as last year where they front-loaded their schedule with a lot of easy opponents. They started off with Colgate, Western Michigan, at Purdue, and then come home to Army. So you figure that's 2, probably 3 wins right there. Then you get into the nightmare portion of the schedule again, like this last year, where you've got Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State back to back to back. And that's where it's really going to see, can they keep up against the top teams in the ACC, getting thrown right from non-conference play into their 3 hardest matchups of the season.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question about this defense then. I just got done with our Texas Tech site, and they're really, really excited about the transfer they took from Syracuse on the defensive line. Like Greer and Linton seem to be guys who were pretty coveted in the portal. I went back and looked at my notes from last year's summer school, and I know that like defensive line depth and size was a concern. Are there young guys that are expected to step up for Syracuse here and fill some of those losses?
Now, there are a few people coming back that were injured early last year, a.k.a. Stefan Thompson as a LB who basically plays the line most of the time. But as far as losing gear stings a lot, you still got Kevin Darton and Terry Lockett, who's also coming back from injury. Caleb Okechukwu is the big guy, really the only big physical guy too on the line. It's still a little thinner than you would like from a defensive line group, but at the very least, you've got guys who picked up a lot of experience last year. It should be a little better, but the two lines, the offensive line and the defensive line, are still probably the thinnest group on this team. It's not as big of a concern, especially when you've got the 3-3-5 where you're not relying a ton on the guys up front, but it's still a deterrent. It's still a reason why this team has the potential to be good, but not great.
I know that they have a new defensive coordinator up there. Can you tell me about the differences in the scheme they might have?
Yeah, Rocky Long, the godfather of the 3-3-5. Now, that being said, they actually ran a lot of 4-2-5 in the spring, which is also what Nick Monroe ran back in the Pinstripe Bowl before he left for Minnesota. It's interesting because you think bringing them into a system that SU has run for years pretty well, but they've run the 4-2-5, at least from what we've seen, just as well. So taking advantage of, there were a couple LBs who were out in spring camp, Stefan Thompson being the main one. So being able to have a little more variety in your defensive scheme, I think is going to pay dividends, because near the end of the season, teams understood that SU could not defend against the run, and they just gouged them week after week. That was really what, in my opinion, tore the season off the tracks. If they can adjust to that this year, I think it'll do a lot better at least limiting teams from running hog wild on them. And the other thing about the defense is it's the kind of the same issue as in years past, where the first teamers are all great, but there is a severe concern with depth at pretty much every position. They're getting a lot of transfers, but to be honest, a lot of that seems to be them building towards 2024 and not guys who are going to be ready to start this year. So they really have to prey on a healthy team.
And look, sometimes teams in college football do stay healthy, right? I don't know if you ever read Phil Steele. He talks classically how when Oklahoma won the title in Bob Stoops' second year there with the Sooners, they didn't lose a single player to injury all year. So like we do see it occasionally that it happens, but certainly depth is a concern for Syracuse here, as you described. In the secondary, so by snap count, they only lost one of their top 5 guys, but obviously Carter and Williams, because they were injured part of the year, didn't play entire starters reps for the season. How confident are you in like Barron and Simmons and Clark and Johnson to step up, or are we worried about a drop off here?
I'm not concerned about most of those guys. Isaiah Johnson will be fine as the number 1 corner. Number 2, a breakout candidate in my eyes, is Jeremiah Wilson. He had a phenomenal camp. It seemed like he was picking the ball off every time you looked at him. Some of the best coverage in one-on-one drills we saw in the spring. So I expect him to be outside on the other side. Elijah Clark, he's fine. He'll rebound. As for the rest of that group, there are some challengers coming in with Jaden Gold and Jaden Bellamy, 2 young guys, both played at the same high school, Virgin Catholic in New Jersey. They went to bigger schools, redshirted, and now SU's got them for the next 4 years. They both had very good camps. I expect both of them to challenge for some significant playing time. And that's one thing that we should see the defense do more of, as long as they're healthy. At least in drills, Rocky Long, we saw, loves to rotate guys in and out as much as he can, keep the offense guessing. And that worked to pretty good effect, granted, against other Syracuse players. But as long as these guys do get enough reps that they're still seeing the field but not gassing themselves, it should be a more balanced defense than last year, where it was obvious that they had one way to attack them that they could not defend, and that was pretty much it.
I'm really interested to see this team play this year. I think Dino does a good job. It strikes me that Syracuse, being a program that is a pretty high academic program, right? Like we talk often about Stanford and Cal and Northwestern, Vanderbilt, the struggles they have in the portal era with getting players in due to credits transferring and whatnot. But Syracuse probably belongs in that discussion to some extent as well, much like a Boston College that occasionally struggles to get guys in. And I'm excited to watch Rocky Long. I think Dino is kind of one of the true characters in coaching. A guy that
Yeah,
I always enjoy talking to him when I see him. There's a lot of win up. Like if you get past that triumvirate of Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State, like Virginia Tech seems very beatable. Boston College certainly beatable. Pitt is not a juggernaut. I mean, Pitt would be favored most likely, but not by a ton. Is that game a neutral site game, by the way?
it's at Yankee. Yeah, it's
Oh,
at Yankee
okay.
Stadium.
That's kind of. Hopefully, the turf will be a little bit better than it was for the.
Jeez,
Gosh, that was.
I hope so.
Dude,
I can
that
tell
was
you,
something,
the
man.
players hated it after the
Yeah,
fact.
I listened to the first half of that on the radio. I was covering the Under Armour All American game. I was like, this sounds terrible. I saw it on TV. I was like, oh my God. Like I'd fake an injury just to get off this thing. And then Wake, certainly we'll see how a lot of that comes down to the quarterback there. I mean, do you think that they're a bowl team?
Syracuse or Wake?
No, Syracuse, excuse me.
Syracuse, yeah, Syracuse. If they could go 7-5 with last year's schedule, they can absolutely get 6 wins in the regular season with this schedule. Like you said, there's those 3 weeks that you can't really pencil in any of them as anything but a loss right now. But this is a team that again could start 4-0. I think they'll at Purdue, even with a new coach, a very different roster. I don't know if I can pencil that in as a win, but if they start the year off strong, survive the gauntlet in the middle, and then finish the year strong, then, like you said, at the back end, there's also at Georgia Tech. I know they brought in. It's a very different team this year. Probably a very improved team, but I think that's still a winnable game too. So you've got
certainly
you've got probably 4-5 games that you should win, and another 3 or 4 coin flips. So as long as you're 500 on the coin flips, you're making a bowl again.
No doubt about it. You can also follow him _Mike Ostrowski _Mike Ostrowski. Mike, I really appreciate the time today, man.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to grade on quick or?
I think we're pretty good.